So good afternoon everyone. So here I am with the English class number 7 with the continuation on what we did yesterday on the discussion of a short story by Leo Tolstoy. The title of the short story was Too Dear. So as I have already told you that whenever you look into any of the title, whether it's a poem or maybe any short story or a essay or a prose or something, please give your importance to what is the title is all about. Okay. Now let me very quickly recapitulate the things that we discussed in the last class. So we are here, I am just trying to give you some one word questions so that you can understand the text in better way, so that you will have to have seriousness towards reading the text. Not only question and answers at the end of the chapter will help you, but reading the text word by word, line to line will also fetch you some good marks when you attempt the board examination, isn't it? For example, if I have to ask you a question like, where was the kingdom of Monaco located? Right? So you have the answer ready with you there. Then if I have to ask you a question like, what is the population of the kingdom of Monaco? What is the another name for the kingdom of Monaco, or what is the synonym, or what exactly is the another name that the same kingdom was used to be called as? So there are certain questions that can be asked from any part of the text, which you will have to be very thoroughly understanding, reading and getting to know the key words that are used in the textbook. Why? Because you have to attempt these answers only from the textbook only. So however the way you find your answers, but it should be on par with the what is given in the text. That is the reason that you should be very specific in your reading, in your preparation for the examination. Okay. So the name, another name for the kingdom of Monaco was, it was also called as a toy kingdom, isn't it? Then the total number of the population, the number of the people that were there in the kingdom was 7,000, isn't it? And the location of the kingdom was on the shores of Mediterranean Sea, isn't it? So when you read these things, you will understand, or you will come to know, or you will be confident enough while answering the questions to the specific questions that are asked from the boards, isn't it? Okay. Now let me very quickly recapitulate certain things that we discussed in the last class. Okay. So this word is a homophone, and this word can be used as a homonym depending on the context and the situation. Then we discussed something about who is Leo Tolstoy, and we discussed some certain things that are related to him. He is a Russian writer, and some of the books that he had written, he became a moral thinker, isn't it? Moralistic views were there, and some semi-autobiographical elements were also found in some of the works that he wrote. All these things, just keep it in your mind. And then we began doing what is the short story is all about, isn't it? So certain things that you can remember, you can just try to revise it. And then we actually were discussing in the last class about the taxes that were being the commodities that were being taxed in the kingdom of Monaco, isn't it? Which is also called as a toy kingdom. So we discussed about some three important commodities that were taxed, right? Tobacco, wine and spirits, and poll tax. Apart from this, there was one more special tax that the prince of the kingdom of Monaco was levying, and it was something on the gaming house, which is also called as gambling houses or something. At the same time, the name of the play or the game was roulette, isn't it? So I had written it on the board in the last class. So the details are also given in the text. Now we stopped at a moment where we saw that this system of gaming houses, or so to say the gambling houses, were gradually being abolished or banned in the European Union, isn't it? But the prince of the kingdom of Monaco was having a kind of a monopoly, like he was the one who did not abolish or banned the game of roulette, because whatever the part of the income that he used to get it from the keeper, one who was running roulette, the same tax was collected and it was used for the administrative purposes in his kingdom. That is the reason that the whole of Europe, almost the whole other countries relating to the European Unions had already banned or abolished this game, because the people were what? The people were becoming maybe very attached on playing this game or something, like, it was yeah, obviously when people start spending their money, when they lose everything, the people were so much attracted to the playing of a game or something in such a way that, yeah, probably it was leading to some anti-social elements, isn't it? So, the moment I start, or that paragraph where we see that it was the only country, or it was the only kingdom which was having the game, that is roulette, that was being played, was only in the kingdom of Monaco. So, the prince or the king of Monaco remained a person, one who was having a monopoly over the game roulette that was being played in his country. I think there I stopped. Other details about the kingdom is like, where is the location, what's the where exactly is the location of the kingdom, and where is it located, and then what all the other things that we discussed. Yeah, we also discussed about the population, the size of the kingdom, isn't it, the size of the kingdom. And then, yes, of course, we also were discussing something about the kinglet. What is a kinglet? A kinglet is something which is an administrative purposes. A kinglet was nothing but the kinglet was something which was nothing but the administrative procedures that were there in the kingdom of Monaco. So, the administration was having a king, and then he was supported by the courtiers, he had a bishop, he has his own ministers. At the same time, he had also generals and an army to the kingdom. And meanwhile, we also discussed, like, there were only about 60 men in the army, isn't it? There were only 60 men in the army. And what is the the kingdom which was, even if it is divided into acre of land or something, that 7,000 people would not have got, because the size of the kingdom was very small. Even that thing we discussed in the last class. And then we were discussing about the taxes that were being the commodities that were being taxed in the country, and we were discussing on the last note about roulette, which we have already discussed. Hope you have everything in your mind, and today let us continue from the point where I had stopped in the last class. Okay, now, so now everyone who wants to gamble goes to Monaco, obvious, no? So, anybody who is willing to play this game, the roulette, anybody who wanted to gamble, anybody who wanted to play this game would obviously come to Monaco, because it was the only country that was having this gaming house, right? Then, whether they win or lose, the prince was gaining by it. That is, whether people from other countries do come play, whether they win or whether they lose, obviously there was a percentage of income that was definitely going to the kingdom, isn't it? So, that is why prince was always gaining. People were either losing or they were winning by playing this game, but on the other hand, the prince of Monaco was always gaining the profit out of it, because he used to get the certain percentage from the keeper, one who used to keep this gaming house called roulette. You can't earn stone palaces by honest labor. Okay, so he comes to one particular proverb in English, and he says that you can't earn stone palaces. Stone palaces, something relating to the strength, something relating to the the strength of a particular palace cannot be always earned by the honest labor, is what he takes the proverb and says, and the kinglet of Monaco knows it is a dirty business. He knows, he realizes that I have not abolished gaming house, roulette in my country, but I need it because in order to maintain or in order to pay for my army, I have to depend on the income that I get from roulette. So, the kingdom, the prince of this kingdom of Monaco was well aware of the fact that I have to run in order to maintain the expenses for my army, which was consisting of some 60 men. Not only army, but also the whole kinglet was depending on the income he used to get from roulette. And the kinglet of Monaco knows it was a dirty business because, you know, like people do come from far off different places or the countries, and they come and they win or lose. Why? Because in the earlier class we also discussed that when a man loses everything in the game, on the name of the game roulette, what does he do at the end? Obviously he had to either kill himself or drown himself. That is what we discussed in the last class. But the prince of the kingdom of Monaco was well aware that it was a dirty business, but he couldn't stop it because he had to bear the expenses for the incurring on the maintaining the kinglet. So it knew that it was a dirty business, but what do he do? What is he to do? He has to live, and to draw the revenue from drink and tobacco is also not a nice thing. Whatever he used to get, the taxes from the other commodities in the kingdom were something that were spent, but it was not enough, right? So that is the reason that he had taxed those three commodities plus this gaming house, by which he was actually trying to maintain, or by which he was actually trying to run the kingdom with the way collecting the income or taxing the people of his own country. All right, then the revenue that he was getting from the drinks and from the tobacco is also not a nice thing. So he lives and reigns and rakes in the money and holds it with court with all the ceremony of a real king. So whatever the income that he used to get from the commodities plus roulette was something that he used to use it for the kinglet or for the smooth conduction of the kingdom in order to do this. Okay. So what do we understand in this paragraph is that the prince of the kingdom of Monaco was well aware of the fact about the pros and the cons of running a gaming house like this, but he did not have any other choice. He had commodities which can be taxed, but at the same time he wanted some additional income in order to run the kinglet, and for that he had to entirely rely upon the game of roulette. Hope I am clear. All right. Yes. Next, he has his coronation. Coronation, he was giving a ceremony, like, he was considered to be the king of the kingdom of Monaco when the crowning ceremony is called as coronation, right? So he has his coronations, he has his levees. That is, levees is nothing but a kind of a power actually that was given, right? That is given to honor a person, isn't it? So he was getting the levees, the spelling of the word L-E-V-E-E-S, nothing but a kind of a honor or a power that he used to get it. So obviously he got this from the people or from his own citizens. So when he used to get this, okay, he used to reward, he used to have sentences and pardons, and he also has his reviews, councils, laws and courts of justice just like other kings, only all but on a smaller scale. Why? Because kingdom of Monaco is considered to be a very small kingdom with respect to the other countries surrounding it. So unlike the other kingdoms, the king also had to survive and he had to maintain the administration process, or he wanted to run the kingdom, and all this used to be coming from a source that was Rowlatt. So, that is why he wanted, like the prince or the kingdom of the king of the kingdom of Monaco wanted to run his kingdom unlike the other neighboring countries. And for this he had everything in terms of the law and order, like he had council members, he had generals, he had army, right. At the same time he also had courtiers, right. So, in order to run the kingdom, the king had to rely upon the income that he used to get from the Rowlatt. This is what you need to understand in this. Okay. All these things are happening exactly the same way like the other neighboring states of Kingdom of Monaco, but it was happening here on a very smaller scale because of the size of the kingdom, that you need to understand here, right. Yeah. On the next page you have something, now it is called as, now let us slowly go back to what is the title is all about. Okay. So, let us see what happens here. Now, it happened a few years ago that a murder was committed in this toy princess domains. Okay. So, all was well, all was going all well for some few years, but one day what happened in the toy kingdom was a murder. Okay. So, now it happened a few years ago that a murder was committed in this toy princess domains, that is in Kingdom of Monaco. One could see that there was a murder committed by someone. Okay. So, there was a murder, The people of that kingdom are peaceable, they always loved peace, they never knew what is non-violence. The kingdom, that is in the Kingdom of Monaco, all the people were peace lovers. So, they were very peaceable, and such a thing had not happened before. A murder in the kingdom or in the premises of the kingdom or in the jurisdiction of the Kingdom of Monaco had never happened because the people were peace lovers. Alright. So, murder was a very new crime, or murder was something that was happening very first time in the kingdom. So, what we see here is that people had not confronted something that is called as murder ever before in the kingdom. Then, the judges assembled with much ceremony and tried the case in the most judicial manner. As I told you that the Kingdom of Monaco was also having a kinglet. So, when this particular crime of a murder was committed in the kingdom, what we see here is that there was a judicial system in the kingdom, and all the judges gathered together, and they wanted to they wanted to give a judgment on the murderer in a more judicial way. They were trying their best to give a sentence or give a verdict, so to say, give a verdict to the murderer who has committed this murder in their kingdom. So, everything was going on, or everything was happening on par with the judicial system that they had in their country. Alright. So, they had their own judicial manner, and everything was happening in the judicial manner. Then, there were judges. Okay. The Kingdom of Monaco was also having judges. They were prosecutors. Who is a prosecutor? A prosecutor can be a person, one who can fight the case, okay, for or against. A prosecutor, prosecution, heard of this word in the courts? Prosecutor, a juryman, and also barristers. Unlike the other judicial system, even the Kingdom of Monaco was also having their own judicial system, which was comprising of judges, barristers, prosecutors, okay, prosecutors, and also there were jurymen, one who could take the decision. Who is a juryman? A person, one who can finally give the verdict. Okay. Now, please try to remember what did we do in the pre-reading activity before we started this short story. Yes, we were discussing something about something that is called as fast track courts, or something that were something like the verdict. Have you come across any instances in your life, or have you seen anything where a death sentence was changed into a lifetime imprisonment. Can you remember that? Yes. Whatever we did or whatever we discussed in the pre-reading activity of this short story is now getting connected with this discussion of the paragraph that had happened in the Kingdom of Monaco. Okay. So, what you mean to understand here is that yes, there was a judicial system and they were considering this case as a very serious case because so far no murder had happened in the kingdom. So, for them this murder was the very first of its kind, and in order to solve or in order to give a verdict for the person one who has committed this crime, that is murder, they were all well aware of their own judicial system and they were very much on track in terms of giving a verdict on the person who has committed the murder, right? Okay. The judges assembled with much ceremony and tried the case in the most judicial manner. Okay. When this case was brought to the court, they were doing it with every judicial manner or with whatever that their judicial system was about to do, and all the people were there in the judgment. There were judges, there were prosecutors, there were jurymen, and also there were barristers. They argued and judged, and at last they condemned the criminal to have his head cut off as the law directs. So, you know the court proceedings in any country, isn't it? So, there is a person one who speaks for and there is a person one who goes for the against. So, prosecutor is a word one who can do that, isn't it? So, before a judgment, you know all the court procedures that happens. Same case also happened here, and finally with a lot of discussion between the prosecutor and the person one who was having this case, because this case was a very new one for them, or it was the very first time that had happened in their country. So, men were there, they argued, they talked about for against the person one who committed, criminal, so to say. The word that is used in the by the author is actually the criminal, isn't it? So, all of them finally came to a conclusion that they condemned the criminal to have his head cut off as the law directs. So, finally no one is above the law, unlike our country, isn't it? So, no one was above the law. Finally, after all the arguments or whatever the settlements that they had it in the court, finally the judge gave a verdict that the criminal's head to be cut off. Getting? So, it was decided by all the officials of the court, and so far so good. Okay. When this verdict came that the criminal's head has to be cut off, okay, everything was fair enough. So, everything was going on a very in a very good phase, and all was well until next. What happened actually was, next they submitted the sentence to the prince. Okay, after deciding that this criminal has to be sentenced to what? Death sentence only. No, when a criminal's head has to be cut off, what does it mean? It means nothing but death sentence. So, after giving a verdict of the death sentence, the same death sentence was actually given before the king, because he has to approve it, because he is the king, right? So, all the judges altogether submitted this death sentence to the prince, and the prince read the sentence and he confirmed it. So, all the power was within the hands of the kingdom, because he is the man one who is ruling the country, and he is supposed to be the king or the prince of the kingdom, and he read all the death sentence that was given by all these judges, and finally he also approved the fact that the criminal's head has to be cut off. So, he also agreed for the death sentence that was given by the judges. Okay. Then the prince read the sentence and confirmed it. If the fellow must be executed, then execute him. The final wordings that were wrote by the king of the Monaco was that yes, you have decided that you will give a death sentence to the man and the criminal is supposed to be executed. So, if you find him guilty, then you have to execute him. So, these were the final wordings by the king and he approved the death sentence. Can follow? Right. So, there was a murder and obviously a person one who does a murder is always called as a murderer, and Tolstoy has used a word as a criminal in this short story, and because of their judicial system, so there were the discussions about what has to be done to the criminal, and finally they decide that his head has to be cut off, means to say that he has to be executed, right. So, finally, what did the king say? The king said that if the fellow nothing but criminal, if the fellow must be executed, then you have to execute him. So, this is the final verdict of the king on par with what judge gave the verdict. Then there was only one hitch in the matter. Hitch, obstacle. Okay. So, there was only one hitch in this matter or in this verdict. Okay. Now, something a kind of an obstacle they were supposed to face it in the future, and what was it is given in this particular paragraph. Okay. And that was that they had neither a guillotine for cutting heads off nor an executioner. Okay. So, underline that particular line of that particular paragraph, because now we slowly see the pre-reading activity question in the short story. Okay. So, what was the verdict that was given by the judge, by the king was same, that is execute him. He has to be executed, and when they really want to execute the criminal, there was an obstacle, there was some problem, there was some kind of a bounding that they had. They cannot have something that is called as that is the kingdom of Monaco was neither having a guillotine. Guillotine, you know that, a kind of a machine that is used to cut the head off, or guillotine is also considered or referred to here as a kind of a something that is given in order to execute, right, execute, or there was not even an executioner. Who is an executioner? Executioner is a person one who actually goes and chops the head of a person. He is also called as an executioner. Okay. But what happened after the judgment was that the kingdom or the king of the Monaco realized that he had everything. He had judges, he has barristers, he has prosecutors, and there was also a judgment. But in order to make that judgment viable, they did not have a guillotine nor they had a executioner. Who did not have a guillotine or an executioner? That is the system. The administration of the kingdom of Monaco was nor having a guillotine nor they had a executioner to cut the head off, this particular criminal who had committed this murder. The ministers considered the matter and decided to address an inquiry to the French government. Okay. The French government was their neighbor, as I said, on the borders of, how did we begin this short story? So, the kingdom of Monaco was located nearly on the shores of Mediterranean Sea, but at the same time it was also a neighborhood to Italy and France, isn't it? So, the ministers of the state had to take this matter very seriously, because they were not having a guillotine or maybe an executioner. So, the French, they wanted to ask, or they wanted to put an inquiry, like they wanted so and so things. So, they finally took a decision that let us approach to the neighboring French government, asking whether the French could not lend them a machine and an expert to cut off the criminal's head, and if so, would the French kindly inform them what it would cost. So, it was decided in their ministerial meeting that in order to give the punishment or in order to execute the murderer, they wanted to take a help of the French government, asking them to provide a guillotine or maybe an executioner. So, they decided that let us give an inquiry to our neighboring French government if they could help us or if they could give us the guillotine or maybe an executioner to deal with this criminal. And they also put a word or they also wrote a letter to them, like if they are willing to provide us what we need, what it would cost. What is the cost of supplying whatever the things that we require. So, they just drafted this letter and they wanted to ask the neighboring French government if they could help in providing what they need. So, what is that they need? They need a guillotine and they need a executioner. Why? You know that. Asking whether the French could lend them a machine and an expert to cut off the criminal's head, and if so, would the French kindly inform them what it would cost? And if so, would the French kindly inform what it would cost? The letter was sent. Finally, they wrote this letter and they wanted to have a kind of an inquiry with their neighboring state in order to get an executioner and a guillotine. A week later, the reply came. A machine and an expert could be supplied and the cost would be 16,000 francs. Okay. So, they had sent a letter and a week after that, they got a reply from the French government saying that they would supply them the machine and an executioner, but it would cost them 16,000 francs. This was laid before the king. This was brought into the consideration or this was brought into the notice of the king that they had inquired with so and so government and the government had sent them a reply that it would cost them 16,000 francs. So, when the matter was brought to the kingdom or when the matter was brought to the prince of the kingdom of Monaco, he thought it over. 16,000 francs. So, this is a kind of a mesmerizing reply that was given by the king because 16,000 francs was a very large sum. It was a very large sum. So, that is why it has been given in the exclamatory mark there. Then, the wretch is not worth the money. The wretch. Who is the wretch here? The murderer. So, the prince is comparing this murderer to a wretched one. Who is a wretched one? A person, one who is something like, where you do not have a mercy, isn't it? So, this wretch is not worth of 16,000 francs. Hope you can understand what is he trying to say. Let's go further and then he says that this wretch is not worth the money, said he. Can't it be done somehow cheaper? So, obviously, a kingdom or a person, one who is running a kingdom will definitely think of the other expenses as well, isn't it? So, he is a murderer, right? And in a death sentence is already been given to him, but due to the lack of the things that these people are not having, they sought the help from the French government, isn't it? So, they sought the help from the French government and French government in turn replied them saying that they would provide whatever they need, but they would charge them around 16,000 francs, which was again a headache to the prince. Why? Because he says, this wretch is not worth the money, said he. Can't it be done somehow cheaper? So, he is just trying to negotiate. He was just trying to negotiate. Why 16,000 francs is more than 2 francs a head on the whole population? Where do you think that the prince of the kingdom of Monaco was getting the money? He used to get it from those 3 commodities where he was levying the taxes. At the same time, he used to get the income from the roulette, isn't it? So, 16,000 when I have to spend some 16,000 francs, then he calculates it like, it would be a burden on the people of my country that they need to pay 2 more francs extra per head. Okay, the people won't stand it and it may cause a riot, right? What is riot? A riot is something which will, that is, people will go against the king. They may start going against the king if he still goes to increase some 2 francs each on everyone's head in his kingdom. He thought that no, I cannot bear, isn't it? Or the expenses cannot be borne by the kingdom because it will be an added extra money that I have to charge from the people of my country. This is what he thinks. And he says that 16,000 francs will be very high, or it will be something that cannot be borne by the king. This is what his ultimate verdict was. Like, you know, he was not willing to spend 16,000 francs by paying it to the French government for the supply of a guillotine, the machine, and the executioner. This is what we need to understand here. Okay, so let us see what happens. So a council was called to consider what could be done, and it was decided to send a similar inquiry to the king of Italy. I hope you can follow this, right? So after again a council of members who met over the issue, and they again thought like what can be done, and finally they came out with a conclusion that let us send a similar letter of inquiry to the another neighboring government that we have, that is Italy. So they sent, or they would be sending. The French government is a republican. Then the French government was a republican. It was a republican country and has no proper respect for the king. These are the reasons that he quotes. But the king of Italy was a brother monarch. Okay, monarch, king. Okay, so he is of the opinion that the French government was a republican form of the government, and that is the reason that they might have charged 16,000 francs for the guillotine or the executioner. So what we do is that let us ask the help from the government of Italy. Why? He quotes a reason for that, because the king of Italy was a brother monarch. So the same, they were running the same form of the government. King was the head. I hope you understand what's the difference between republican country and a presidential country, right? So what do we have in the US? Presidential rule. What do we have in India? We have a republican state here, isn't it? So prime ministers. So when we talk about the judicial system, we also have to think about what a specific country is following, right? So when they sought the help from the French government, it was a republican form of government and they got a reply. But now the ministers are of the opinion that now let us approach to the same judicial system that is being followed in Italy, because even Italy was also ruled by a king, and he was a brother monarch. He was a brother monarch, and might he be ready to induce to the thing cheaper. So the letter was written, and a prompt reply was also written. So they were of the opinion that now let us not go to the French government, let us go, or let us send a similar inquiry letter to the Kingdom of Italy or to the King of Italy, and let us see what do they quote. So they were expecting some reply from the government of Italy as well, in order to get these particular things in the form of executing the criminal that they have in their country. And there was a verdict that was already given, and the king has also approved that the criminal's head has to be cut off. Right? Hope you can follow it, right? Then the Italian government wrote that they would have a pleasure in supplying both a machine and an expert, and the whole cost would be 12,000 francs. Okay, look at how actually the story unfolds. Okay, first they approached French, now they have approached Italy. Now they are hopeful of getting a cheaper whatever the requirement from the Italy government, because they think that Italy is a brother monarch. So when a letter of inquiry was sent in order to supply them a guillotine, as a guillotine, nothing but a machine, and a executioner, they said a prompt reply by saying that the government of Italy would be happy enough to give them an executioner and a guillotine, but they would charge how many? 12,000 francs, including the traveling expenses. So this was a response that they received from the Italian government, that they would do it, they would supply it at the cost of 12,000 francs. So dear students, understand what is the negotiation that is happening, and why is this negotiation happening, and why are they seeking the help from the other two governments, whether it is French or from Italy. Okay. So what we see here is that 12,000 francs, including the traveling expenses, this was cheaper, but still it seemed too much. Okay. Obviously they are getting it lesser than 4,000 francs to comparing it to the French government. So Italian government or Italian government has accepted that their request would be sought in the terms of supplying whatever they need at the cost of 12,000 francs. So when this matter was brought into the notice to the king or to the prince of the kingdom of Monaco, they thought that it is, yes, bit cheaper, but at the same time they had a dilemmatic mind. That is, the king was again in a dilemma whether to go for it or not, because he is more concerned about the population, he is more concerned about the people of the country, and he is more concerned about how can he further burden the people of the kingdom of Monaco. So what we see here is that 12,000 is bit cheaper compared to the French government, but still it was something which was very quite or huge amount for them. Okay, so it was again a huge amount for them. Look at the words that are used by the prince of the kingdom of Monaco. Okay, again he compares him to a rascal. He says the rascal was really not worth the money. Whom is he comparing when he says rascal? Rascal is a direct comparison to the murderer, isn't it? The rascal is not really worth even of 12,000 francs. It would still mean nearly 2 francs more per head on the taxes. Another council was called. No. The prince of the kingdom of Monaco is still not convinced, and he still thinks that I have to burden the people of my country in order to execute the murderer. So again a council was called. They discussed and considered how it could be done with less expense. So what you mean to understand here is that neither support or an help from the French government is accepted, nor a help that was sent by the Italian government is also accepted by the prince of the kingdom of Monaco, because for him extra money is nothing but he had to rely completely on taxing the people furthermore. So that is why there was another council that was called, and the council ministers all gathered together and they had started discussing how to treat this criminal or a murderer with less expenses. So this is what exactly is the agenda, why these people have met over a council meeting, and what do they decide and what do they do. We will do it in the next class. So my dear students, give importance to all the words or the sentences or the phrases that we have read so far, and just give your kind of a serious reading towards this, so that you will be able to get the minute details about what Leo Tolstoy wants to say in this short story in order to execute the murderer, so to say the criminal. Okay, you can see, or you can just revise it once again by saying, like, the king of Monaco was very much angry on the murderer because of two reasons. The first thing is that this was the first crime that was committed in the kingdom, and at the same time the king did not want to burden more on his countrymen. He did not want to burden the countrymen by again levying some taxes, because he has already been collecting the taxes. So, what we need to understand here is that they at the end of the day want to treat or want to solve this case of executing this murderer with very less expenses, so that he cannot burden the citizens, or so that he cannot burden his own countrymen. So, we will stop here. We will continue it in my next class. Thank you.